Hi, welcome to the School Community Huddle with Ana Martinez. Today we have two very special guests, experts in their field. Go ahead, special guest, introduce yourself, number of years of experience, and the various positions you've held in education.
Okay, I can start. My name is Leilani Lafarie. I am a principal currently. I'm entering my 17th year in education, and I have been a teacher mostly in the upper grade, 4th and 5th grade. I also did some time in kindergarten and middle school, actually. And so I also am a mom. I currently have a son who is going into 3rd grade. Also within my educational career, I've been a coach, an instructional coach, and a director of instructional coaching. And yes, I have loved every moment of education, and I can't imagine myself doing anything else.
I love that.
My name is Katia Sanchez, and this is going to be my 7th year in education. I was a school counselor. That's how I started off. And then I was a culture and climate specialist, and now I'm an assistant principal. Similarly, I think I originally envisioned myself to be primarily at the high school level, and I started at the elementary level, and now I'm like, I see myself somewhere else, but definitely elementary has my heart.
And so both of your schools are going to transition onto virtual learning this fall, right? And so I'm wondering, what are some of the questions or some of the concerns or things that parents are asking you right now? Like, what's on top for a lot of the parents you have been communicating with and working with?
I think for us, it's been this idea of falling behind, like students falling behind, which it's valid, absolutely a valid concern. And so that's just what they want to know what to do. And so I think sometimes it feels challenging because what we are asking them to do is really understand that kids are going through something right now. Our whole world is actually going through something right now, our whole country. And so some of the goals that existed when we were in the building might not look exactly the same. And so I'm actually challenged as an administrator to explain that, like, it's actually okay that they're not in this place that we've truly made up and created, like because standards have switched in the past 10 years, right? In our lifetime, things that used to be in 1st grade are now in kindergarten, right? So like we kind of have created this artificial system of where kids are supposed to be. And so now parents, and like I think the way that you started, right? Because they love them, because they want the best for their kids, want their kids to just advance, without necessarily acknowledging that it's okay that maybe this isn't going to go the way we think it's supposed to go. And so I feel like that's what I'm personally feeling challenged by not, I'm not lowering the expectation for kids, but I'm also being realistic about what virtual learning can provide. And so I want parents to know that it's okay. Like, I think when kids are showing up to Zooms and like, if that's all that they can do in a day, that's going to be okay. But I know that feels hard for some of the parents. They're like, but college, but this. So.
I think for me, some of the concerns, so definitely what Leilani mentioned, I feel like we're on the same page. We're hearing a lot of the same things. We've actually had a couple of parents ask if their child could be held back because they're feeling so anxious. And that's literally been it's been multiple parents. Mm-hmm. So it's like a trend right now. And I think similar to what Leilani said, I think it comes from they're behind, if they keep moving, they're not going to learn what they need to learn. So I definitely think adding what Leilani said, the perspective of it's a constructed standard that is probably going to have to be adjusted again because of this global pandemic. I think the other thing that I'm hearing a lot, and this is a hard situation of parents that are I work, I have to work. So what's the plan for my child who is staying with their grandma or their aunt or their older sibling and doesn't have the support, or they have the support, but that person that's taking care of them maybe doesn't know how to help them through distance learning. And so I think that's another concern that's coming up a lot, and a very real concern that it's even hard for me to answer the like, well, like, what do we do about that? Because every family has been different. So I don't even have a, like, I ideally want to give like, you can do this, but there's no like right answer, you know?
Mm-hmm. I love that. I want to go back to the standards thing, and I want to use this time for families that are watching, or brand new teachers that are watching, or caregivers that are giving distance learning, virtual learning at home. There's something that each state creates. It's called the learning standards. They're for reading, writing, math, science, social studies. And each state has their own individual learning standards, at least back 10 years ago, right? And we used to test them through something called the CST. For us in California, it was the California Standards Test, right? And probably in my third or fourth year of principalship, which was about 10 years ago, like Leilani said, the state realized that those standards, they realized, were not rigorous enough, or they weren't deep in pushing our students' thinking, right? They were pretty surface level, or whatever the reason is, that they changed to the Common Core standards. Some states had already adopted Common Core standards, so there are less standards to cover, because we were, as teachers, having to cover so much in any year. And so we have to cover less, but it's actually about going deeper and understanding either like the conceptual pieces or like the critical thinking pieces. And so the thing that's important to note about that is they're constructed by people, by human beings in our state capital, and experts to some extent of what they believe based on their research, based on their learning, what students should learn at each grade level. And an example of that is what a kindergartner was expected to learn like 12 years ago by the end of kindergarten has now raised the bar. So now they have to learn some things that in the past we thought first graders had to learn. Now we're expecting them to learn it in kindergarten. So you as parents, when you're like worried that they're falling behind, you're actually measuring them against this man-made, constructed standard. So your kid is as behind as they've been exposed to those things. It doesn't mean that they are not smart. It does not mean that they cannot learn those things. It does not mean that they are behind. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Leilani and Katya.
Yeah, I think and it's very real that parents feel that way, right? Because I do still think that we compare kids, especially if you have multiple kids in your home, and you're like, but this one learns this, and this one does this, and this one doesn't know that. So, but yes, but it is true. All of the things you're saying is true. It is absolutely a construction that could be reconstructed at any time through legislation and executive orders. And so, but I do think, I don't know if there's a point in this conversation where we can talk about like, what are the things we should be focusing on, right? Because that is, and I know Katya's principal is doing this, I know that I'm doing this, is like, we are helping teachers right now to say, okay, we know that we have a limited amount of time, and we know we have this new virtual reality, and so what are the main things? And it's not only school-age children. I've actually had this conversation with somebody about preschool foundations too, because that is a big thing if you're not sending your kid back to preschool. So that's just what I would add. Like, we can talk later about like, what is it that kids then should be thinking about?
And so I think, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how do we begin to know, because like to Katya's point, some parents are like, let's retain my kid because they think that's going to help them. And there is research that literally just came out a few months ago on acceleration versus retention. So we're all scared about this global pandemic, and we're all worried. And in reality, this is not the first time that we are in a situation where schooling has stopped and we have to take care of ourselves as individuals in our communities. And then people have to figure out what to do for the kids the following year because weeks have been lost. So an example of that is Hurricane Katrina and that disaster that happened. And so what was focused on there was, well, let's go back to the standards that they lost. But in doing that the following year, that means you're losing part of the learning from that year. And what happens is it's typically like remote learning, like memorization, let's remember, or like standards that are below grade level, like we say. And then the kids either get bored or they feel like more mature and like, this is boring, this is repeating itself, when in reality, we could focus on accelerating our students. So let's talk about what should we focus on in schools, and how would parents even begin to know if their school is accelerating instead of reviewing retention, like old standards or things that are not at the grade level of this child?
I can start with, I think parents have every right to ask that question. Mm-hmm. So just like and I'm sure lots of people are hosting, I know lots of principals and teachers are hosting meetings right now. I think it would be a great question to ask, like, what is the plan? So I know that last spring we were off. What is the plan for, like, are you guys going to review all of that material, or is it that we're starting, like, I think just asking some general questions to see what the response is would be helpful. I also think just generally, like, the biggest factor in reading success, and I'm just going to talk about reading right now. I think math is, we can talk about that in another time or later, but like the biggest factor in reading success is background knowledge. Like that's even, and I know, right, in the younger grades, we need to know phonics and sounds and letters and how to put words and sentences together. But the biggest thing parents can do right now is just expose their children to information. Because if I read a text about, let's say, something I don't know well, like physics, I'm a good reader and I can read it, but I won't understand that text because I don't understand that content. And so this is the same thing for young children right now. If they're reading a book about the sun, the moon, the stars, and they don't have a lot of background knowledge, they haven't watched YouTube videos on it, it's going to be harder for them to access that text. That's a thing that all parents can do right now, is just start to expose them to general bodies of knowledge, like science, like geography, so kids have a background understanding. And I think that's actually not, I think most parents have access to that, right? All of us have our cell phones, all of us have YouTube, all of us can talk to our kids about the things we're experts on. My husband right now is doing a lot of gardening work with my son, and I feel like just even that life cycle of plants is background knowledge that he's acquiring, even though we've not been great at doing academic things this summer, but like that is something that when he approaches a text about science, especially life science, he's actually going to have some schema around so he can actually access the text. So I'd say those are two different ideas that I just said about like asking the teacher and then just what parents can be doing to support reading success for their students.
No, I completely agree. I think your child is interested in the subject already. Mm-hmm. I really love dinosaurs. I really love soccer. I really love basketball or planting, or I actually don't know what I love, but the parent loves something. So the parent can be an expert in that field. And what happens is, say I'm really good at cooking and my child's watching me cook every day. So like I might say, come here, I'll show you how to cook with me. And I can build vocabulary in that, right? And then we can get books around cooking. And then what happens is now when they read the book, that makes more sense to them because they have the background knowledge. So if a child's really into, if you're like, stop looking at your dinosaurs, in reality, you could find YouTubes on dinosaurs, you could find books on dinosaurs, you're building their vocabulary. So next time they read a book at their grade level, they're in fifth grade, a fifth grade book, it's going to make more sense to them because they would have already built the background knowledge. And that's kind of what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. So I'm thinking about like, how else do we know? For instance, let's talk about that. I think we think, I'm not a teacher. How am I going to help them? And how can we use our home as our learning environment if I am a full-time parent or if I'm not a full-time parent? I mean, if I'm a full-time working parent, if I'm not a full-time working parent, how can I use my learning environment to actually be, to teach some of these skills?
I really liked the idea of what you mentioned. I guess when I think of cooking, I'm thinking even like measurements, right? If they take them to the grocery store, what comes to mind is like you're also weighing out prices. Like I think it would be helpful to think back, like all of us as adults actually still use a lot of concepts that students learn in school. And so almost like for us as adults, diagnosing those things and then involving our like kids in that. Because even thinking of like Leilani, what you said, like the planting, like planting its own is actually there's units on planting, and like you could teach them through that. And I think I would think through like the different activities that you do as a parent, just like in life, and thinking through how that could connect to learning is one way to go about that.
Yeah. Sorry, and I also think, so like those are some of the specific academic skills. I think there's also non-academic skills. This is one of the things that I was talking to a parent about with preschool. Like in the preschool foundations, there's a whole thing on social emotional learning, right? Like, how do you think that child feels right now? Like we're watching a TV show together. What do you think happened that made him feel that way? What do you think would make him feel better? Those are things that we can really be active with our kids about. And I will say, my son has about 5 minutes of patience for that conversation, but it's still 5 minutes that we can spend together where we can talk about things. I also ask him to make predictions, like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, they just showed us this. Sometimes he doesn't want to engage with, sometimes he does. Right? And so that type of thinking is not specifically academic. It's more just this different skill set that makes people really successful though in life. And I'm sure, Kakita, you can talk about that for a long time about some of those things.
Yeah, I think there's actually in schools we're starting to like go into doing a bigger emphasis on social emotional learning. And I think like some of the competencies are for sure, the SEL competencies are things that kids like practice like every day. So like some of them would be self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills. There's one more, responsible decision making. And those are things that you could like think through with kids. Like, well, what are the pros that are going to come from this decision and what are the cons? And engaging students in that conversation, that alone already takes care of that, like some of those competencies. What Leilani said, asking to for their emotions. Time management goes into that, like them being able to use a timer and monitoring, like, well, you're going to work out for this long, like how long of a break do you need? I definitely think right now is an amazing time to like develop our students in their emotional intelligence. And I will say this, like our kids can be 3 grade levels above where they're supposed to be. And if they don't have the social skills and emotional intelligence, they could go on to a job and not be able to hold the job because they don't have those skills to interact with others. And even nowadays, most jobs are done, like you have to work with other people. And so again, like they could be above like their reading level 3 years. And if they don't have that emotional intelligence, then it's going to become a really big barrier in the future. So
yeah, I love that you said that. So it's almost about what are the skills that can be transferable for every grade into adulthood. Think about the little person you're raising. Are they empathetic towards other people? Do they foster positive relationships? Do they have a growth mindset and an awareness like, oh, I was kind of mean to my abuelita or to my uncle who was trying to help me, or I was frustrated with math. Why was I frustrated? So just like that kind of awareness is so huge, because that means that you're raising a human being that is going to, when they encounter a challenge, reflect and get better the next time, right? And so I really appreciate that. And I want to talk about time management, because I know a lot of questions I've been receiving is like, what's the right schedule? What schedule do I have? And then for my full-time parents, full-time working parents, they're like, how do I hold them accountable to that schedule? And so I'm wondering, how do you create a schedule? And I know you serve kids from TK all the way to 5th and 6th grade, but how would you even begin constructing a schedule at home with your child with the help of the school?
I think that right now, teachers will be presenting a schedule. So
okay.
I do think that meaning when they are going to be at least in our organization, when they are going to be live, when they will be teaching. So that's a great way to start as a parent and to figure out like how we're going to do that. I think kids, and I'll speak for my son, I should say, he wants to see other kids on Zoom, like, right, because he's my only child at home. So he will be really engaged with that. And I think there will be some conflict started if we don't get him on that at that time, right? So I think right now, parents can try to find a way to at least get them on the live teaching Zoom, whenever that is. And that is, you know, coaching grandma through like, hey, just set an alarm for 9 o'clock if my kid is 6 years old and can't do it, or coaching the babysitter, because those are the people truly that are going to be with the kids right now if parents have to work. And so I think that is, as a parent, what we need to also do if we're working, right? Because it's, you know, I think we will cause some issues with our children. I think conflicts truly, if we're not even supporting them to get on and just saying, we can't do it, grandma can't do it. But my mom is 70 something years old. She's working Zoom now, you know, like everybody has the capacity and ability to support us, and we don't have to do it on our own. So that would be first. The other thing is after that, I think whatever the schedule is, just knowing when their sort of free playtime is and knowing when then it's school time. Once again, the biggest conflicts that I enter into my son is like when it just seems randomly like, okay, let's do schoolwork. And he's like on the iPad looking at me like, where did that come from? Like, why out of the blue did you just decide that? And so it's really helpful. And even if I haven't scheduled it in the days, like, okay, you have 5 more minutes, and we have Alexa, right? So Alexa, set a timer for 5 minutes. And then when that goes off, then you'll come to the table. At least it prepares him so it doesn't seem so random. And I think that's just the biggest advice that I could give to people is kids are already experiencing a lot of randomness in their life. And so don't add some more crazy just surprises and all of the things if we can help it. And so the schedule itself is not as, I should say, like what's on the schedule itself is not as important as making sure that kids feel like they have some agency in their day. That will just avoid a lot of conflicts, some meltdowns, and those things.
I think following up with what Leilani said, I think I definitely feel like this is like one of those of like I'm conflicted on like, oh, I want to tell, like there's a temptation to tell parents like follow the schedule, but then like if I'm like, let's keeping it real, right? I think asking a teacher like what are the things that my child for sure has to be on, that you're going to be live, that they have to be on there, and what are the times that I can move around. And I think the other piece too is getting to know, like you're going to have to get to know what type of learner they are, your child. You might know, but I'm just thinking like for myself, like I might not know the type of learner that my child is because most of their learning, like academic learning, was in school. And I think the added piece is that some of your, like the little ones may not know them. They themselves don't know the type of learners that they are. So I think there might need to be some exploration in the beginning where you're asking them like, okay, like how did that feel doing this work at this time versus this time? And weighing out like the pros and the cons. Because let's just say, for example, they do a certain like homework right after they got the lesson, right? And then you can weigh out the pros and cons to that. And then weighing out, what if you gave them a break after the live lesson and then they came back to it? And weighing out the pros and cons. And the question not being so much, like it's both, like what felt better, but also what helped you be the best learner. Because sometimes what felt better doesn't get you to be the best learner you can be. So I think it's important to ask both, like, what was the most productive thing? And like, yes, like what felt good, you know? But again, making sure, you know, ask both because, and I think, like I said, I think if you have little ones, I think it's harder because they might not know. Like you might have to actually really observe them and see like, okay, they're getting jittery because that might be a sign. Like you also have to figure out like their attention span because different kids have different attention spans to then plan out their breaks because what Leilani said, I think is very true. I feel like I think there's going to have to be some getting to know your child as a learner and attention spans and like their preference for schedules. Some students, some like human beings are not morning people is the other piece. And some kids are, like some kids do their best work in the morning. So then you might want to fit in those things that are movable to the morning versus like the afternoon, late at night. And then other kids like do better work at night. So I think that's like the exploration piece comes in. And with the little ones, the observation piece, because I think little ones might not be able to express how they're feeling it. And I think a lot of communication with the teacher to see what are the things that you can move around.
I love that. So if I can recap, I heard from Leilani, setting up a routine with your child, especially in elementary school, TK to 6, kids thrive on routine. And what I heard is there's so much change happening in our world around them. The least we could do is give them a routine that makes them start feeling safe and secure, and they always expect it. And don't use the routine without some type of support, a timer, you put the schedule up on the wall, and kids become independent even at the age of 5. When they do the same thing every day, they'll just do it on their own. It's like a routine, right? And I appreciate that you said, and if you have a caregiver, show them the routine, have them instill the routine. And one, it's going to be easier for the caregiver. And then 2, you're also showing maybe an older caregiver how to use some of this new technology, right? So I appreciate that. And Katia, you forever always instill SEL embed SEL into everything, which I love. So it's like, here's the schedule, but now let's reflect what worked for us, what didn't. Did I stay true to it? Did I not? Why? Like, I appreciate that, because I think that's going to create the self-awareness that you talked about, is you know your child, but getting to know them as a learner. That is so key. Katia, yes, that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Like, parents, it's a new mindset. You're getting to know them as a learner. So Leilani, like, what are the challenges for you with your child? Like, you know your child, you love your child, but now you're getting to know them as a learner. And how have you like regulated your own like full-time job, self-emotions, communication with your husband? Like, how do we how has that gone?
You know, like everyone else. And so I think at first when we were in regular school, my son had a regular school schedule. I could come home and I would do homework with him. So I was really in charge of school for him. My husband was in charge of like getting him there and dropping him off and picking him up and things like that. But I was in charge of more of the academic, which makes sense. I'm the teacher and my husband is not. And now this has shifted because I have to be on Zooms and with teachers and families, and my husband is actually doing the work. He is, I would say, less regimented in the schedule. However, his version of a schedule, though, is like, we know you had your teacher Zoom at 10:30, so we're going to do the schoolwork sometime before 10:30, right? And so that was schedule enough. I think it was predictable enough for my son to know. And so they had their schedule where it's like, when you eat breakfast around 8:30, right? When you get dressed, when you brush your teeth, when you do your schoolwork, and when you have your Zoom. After that, the day went a little more surprised or whatever they wanted to do. But we could at least get the schedule until actually about 11:30 that both of them could agree on. There was actually not a lot of coercing, not a lot of arguments, because Emmanuel just knew that was the schedule. And so I think a lot of it landed on when the teacher was going to be on Zoom. And that's why I'm saying that, because that's the thing that he looked forward to, because that's, he felt accountable to his teacher. He felt accountable to seeing his friends. So we built the schedule around that. And I think that really supported it. My husband is also really good at taking suggestions when I give them in a loving way. And so, I'll say, especially this summer, I'm like, so maybe you guys should start, doing some practicing academic work, like even just saying his times tables on your walks, because they go on walks every day. And he's like, oh, okay. And then they did this whole hard times table thing, like he did double digit. I was like, no. Like he just needs to do single. So, it's also like a lot of just positive feedback, but knowing that my husband is trying to implement my suggestions, and then I just have to like kind of give it to him again and just, so, but it's also like we're working on like partnerships, right? I have to work on my own SEL and just knowing my husband has the best intentions, trying to figure out what suggestion is correct right now that he can take that won't overwhelm him, won't overwhelm my son. So it's a lot of managing of people, right? Like right now, including myself.
I think going along with what Leilani said, I feel like partnerships are like very key. And I think communication among adults of like what's working and what's not working. And I think almost like in the beginning, I know this sounds very, maybe it sounds corny, but almost like every week having like a real conversation about like, how is it going? Like, what do you think worked? What didn't work? And what do we need to do to work together to make this happen for our child? And I think also figuring out who your people are in like your family that are going to help you, or not family. Like, I don't know, everyone's family is different, or everyone is different in terms of who's supporting them. So figuring out who those people are. And like for some of us, like it might be our own older children that are that support. So I think even more important if it is like your older children that are being those people, making sure to touch base with them, because it might also be like a heavier load on them. So making sure you make that time to check in, because it's hard work. I think naming that it really is hard work. It can be stressful. And so making sure we have that emotional contact.
Mm-hmm. I keep hearing a theme in every response that you two are saying. And it's like, nobody has this perfect. Not even a child who is a child of a teacher or an educator. Like, we're all struggling, and figure out what works for you and your family, right? So that's why I have this sign, you are enough, because the fact that you're even trying, that's huge. Like, parents, this podcast is not to make anyone feel guilty. It's to give you resources to reflect, like, oh, let me try that. Let me try that. But the other theme that I'm hearing is conversations with your family, with your parents, with your children. And essentially that's what educators do. We have conversations and we get to know these little people. And in having conversations, we're building their vocabulary. We're seeing how they think. We're saying how they see the world. But we're also at that point interjecting and saying, oh, that's interesting. Have you thought of this? Or because I think it's, even with my nieces, it's my response to be like, that's not right. And I think now more than ever, I heard you say this, Leilani, like just having patience and grace, one with ourselves. Like, I might be on edge or I might be stressed out. What do I need for self-care? And two, how do I give feedback to the people who help? Now we're going to come to a close. Parents, it's lovely to have you here today. And Leilani and Katia, it was such a pleasure to have you and hear from you, from your perspective on how you're working with your families and students. I'm just wondering if there's one takeaway that you want families who are at home about to embark on this virtual learning experience again, that you want them to take away.
Say, obviously, the teacher is just a partner with your child in education. So use the teacher to ask questions, to support. Especially, I think the one thing I want everyone to know, every family can do anything, even if we are working, they can do something, I should say. And so like that little bit of background knowledge and talking to your child and doing those things just about the things that you feel like you're an expert on as a parent is actually going to help them in the long run, especially to read. The other resources that I've used, because I think social emotional learning and those things, even for my own child, was challenging, and just meaning like, because I was like, where do I start, at first. And so we ordered just a few books on Amazon. Like, one is the Big Life Journal, which actually has been really helpful. It's just conversation starters. There's another like daily journal prompts. And so those also, just focus on like cute questions for kids, and that if you're, kind of struggle, because sometimes you just struggle to have those types of conversations with kids, but there's just really cute prompts. Like, if you could build an imaginary dream house, what would it be, and so we get to imagine, we get to talk, and, he eventually has to write it, which he doesn't love, but at least, we're doing like some of that academic talk and academic speak and SEL work. So there's just resources that you can really quickly Google on Amazon. But parents, you're doing a good job. That's the takeaway, and you're trying your hardest. And there's people and places that can help.
Mm-hmm. Mine is, I think the first one is just like communicate with us as much as you can and letting us know like what you need support with. Schools have a lot of, they're gathering resources, and the state is also starting to give us more resources that we can give to families. But I think right now, so we need to know like what you need pretty much. And like just situation awareness. So I think going back, I know with our school, for example, we're trying to figure out learning buddies. So for those families that don't have anyone at home to support them, that even like in terms of doing the work, Learning Buddies is a system that we're creating so that if a family like just has grandma and grandma like feels uncomfortable, but they can get them onto Zoom, then we have Learning Buddies to help them do the work, the independent work, right? But like we're going off of like if parents tell us like I don't have anyone at home to help us. So if you don't tell us, then I don't know to get you a Learning Buddy. Does that make sense? Yeah. So just telling us like what's going on. I think that's my biggest one, because even whether it be Learning Buddies, whether it be if someone is sick at home and maybe you need more check-ins during that time, if someone is test positive and you need someone more actively checking in those weeks, like we got you, like we can pull our counselor, we can pull myself to check in with them more, but we won't be able to do that unless we know what's happening. So like communicating with us, obviously to your comfort level, but we're in this together and like we want to support as much as we can. And I think the next one is everything is a learning experience. I feel like right now that they're at home, like teach them how to, like they're eventually going to be adults, teach them how to cook. Like they have to learn how to cook. Like right now is a good time for them to learn how to do laundry. Eventually they're going to need to learn how to do laundry. Yes. I feel like weighing out prices when you're at the grocery store, picking fruits and vegetables. Like I know that seems really random, but it's skills that they really do need as adults that like, if you go to the store and you're teaching them how to pick like mangoes, they're going to learn the word mango. If you're teaching them like how to introducing them to the different vegetables and telling them how to say it in Spanish and English, that's new vocabulary. So just involving them in like everyday activities as much as you can is learning within itself. Mm-hmm. And right now, like I said, life skills is one that we can easily teach them. And I feel like it's never too young to teach them those things. And so right now is an awesome opportunity to do that. And like Leilani said, I feel like parents, you're amazing and feel empowered and know that you are enough and that you are amazing and you can teach your children like to be amazing along with you. They already are. But yeah, that's mine.
Yeah, that's great. I love the idea of Learning Buddies. If your school doesn't do it, you can find someone that you can have a learning buddy with, right? And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate just like you can learn from anything. So if you do have a caregiver that can't help because of the language barrier, then caregiver teach them a language. I mean, people are paying a lot of money to learn a different language right now. Mm-hmm. What an amazing opportunity, right? We can see things and let it weigh heavily on us, which I've had those moments, or we can see things and say, how can I utilize this to really amplify the learning and make it just really individualized for my child, right? But I love the idea of partnering with the school and looking at what the school has to offer already, because I'm sure they all have something amazing to offer. So thank you all for being here today. If you're an educator, a parent, I hope you got something from this today. It's just to help. It's just a resource. If you're doing all of it or none of it, it's not a judgment. Remember, you are enough. And if you have any questions or you want to hear more, please put it in our in the questions in the YouTube, or reach out to me on Ana Martinez _410 and tell me what you want us to talk about so that we are helping you help your child better. So thank you, Leilani, and thank you, Katia, for being here today.
Thank you, Ana.